Good day everyone, I am Angelica Maridim Ano from 1BS Entry, a nursing student from PLMAR, and I'm going to do the range of motion exercises. So, we define range of motion exercises as a device self-imposed or set to keep the body and mind trim. It is also exercise in the exertion of the body for maintenance of its health. Exercise is also a physical activity for conditioning the body in improving health and maintaining fitness. So, what is the purpose in health? To promote health by improving functioning of the circulatory and the lung system. It is also to retain movements in our joints, and the normal tone in our muscles. And also to prevent stiffness of joints, to decrease cholesterol level, to decrease the body weight of an obese person, to delay the degenerative changes, to also improve the flexibility and overall muscle strength endurance. So, the purpose in sickness is to prepare the patient for ambulation in cervical fracture, crutch walking deformities, and fracture of extremities, orthopedic condition, post-operative period. And also to restore the muscle function, strengthen the weak muscle, to promote physical mobility, to prevent deformities, and also to improve the blood supply and improve the functioning of our lungs, and to prevent the constipation, to reduce the stress. So there are 15 movements of our various joints, which are abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, rotation, internal, external, dorsiflexion, the palmar flexion, and a plantar flexion, pronation, supination, opposition, inversion, eversion, and the indication to assess the joint flexibility before doing an exercise, and also to maintain joint mobility and flexibility in an inactive patients, and also to prevent ankylosing, which is the permanent loss of joint movement, and also to stretch joints before doing strenuous activities, to evaluate the patient's response to therapeutic exercise, and last is to prevent the contracture and adaptive shortening. Next is to describe the passive ROM exercise by performing or verbally cue the client. It is to exercise all the joint areas. Next is start at the client's head and perform ROM exercise down each side of the body to provide systematic method to ensure that all the body parts are exercised. Next is repeat each ROM exercise as the client tolerates to a maximum of 5 times. Perform each motion in a slow, firm manner. Encourage full joint movement but do not go beyond the point of pain. If the client suddenly felt pain, you can just stop for a minute. And also if the client also feel the resistance or fatigue, to provide exercise to the client's tolerance. So, come in, ma'am. Can you please sit here, ma'am?
Okay, thank you.
So, good morning, Ma'am Jasmine Sandalo. I am Angelica, and I am the assigned student nurse for today. So, how would you like me to call you?
Just, you can call me Jazz.
Okay, Ma'am Jazz. I am going to do your range of motion exercises, and it will last for 15 to 20 minutes. Is it okay to you, ma'am?
Okay.
I will please provide service. So first, ma'am, we're going to start from your head. Perform these movements with the client in the sitting position, if possible. So first, you're doing the rotation. So first, head rotation by turning the head from side to side. Just from side to side. Okay? Ayan. Again. 1, 2. Okay. Good. Next is the flexion and extension. To do the head flexion and extension. So, ma'am, we're going to tilt the head towards the chest and then tilt slightly upward. So, like this and slightly upward. Okay, ma'am? Can you do it, ma'am? Okay. Upward. So, flexion and extension. Okay. So next we're going to do the lateral flexion. Tilt the head on each side so as to almost to touch the ear to the shoulder. So lateral flexion, like tilting the head on each so as to almost touch the ear to the shoulder. So like this, ma'am. Okay, no? Lateral flexion. Okay. Next, again. Okay. It is to optimize the performance of the movements to preserve the muscle tone and the joint flexibility. So next we're going to proceed in the neck. First we're going to do the flexion and extension and the hyper extension. We're going to tilt your neck back. Okay, so ma'am, flexion and extension and hyper extension. And next, again, flexion, extension, and hyper extension. Next is the lateral flexion. We're going to move head to touch touch ear to shoulder like this, ma'am. Okay. So the lateral flexion. Okay. Next to the other side. Again. Okay, great. So next is the rotation. We're going to rotate the neck in a semicircle with supporting the head. So, ma'am, I will hold your head and move it in semicircle way. Hmm? So, it is the rotation of the neck. Okay. So, next, in doing the trunk range of motion exercise, I will be putting the client in a stand-up position. Ma'am, can you please stand up? First, rotation. So, ma'am, you need to turn the shoulder forward and return to the normal position like this. Sorry, ma'am. Rotation. Okay. Next. Again. Okay. So next, flexion and extension, which is you need to bend the trunk forward and straighten the trunk and then extend slightly backward. So mom, like this and slightly backward. Okay, ma'am. So flexion. Okay. And extension. Again. Flexion. And extension. So next, in lateral flexion, I want you to tilt the trunk to the left side and straighten the trunk and tilt to the right side. So like this. Okay, can you reach that, mom? Okay, go. Okay. Next again. On the other side. Okay. So we're doing this to optimize the performance of the movements and to preserve the muscle tone and the flexibility of the joint. Next is we're going to move from the we're going to move to the arm. So we're going to do the flexion, extension, again flexion, extension. Next is the abduction from the side and adduction. So abduction, adduction. Okay. Next on the other side, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and abduction, adduction. So next we're going to move in the shoulder flexion, flexion, extension. Okay, so again, flexion, extension. Like the other side now, the flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. So next is the hyperextension, which is you need to move straight arm behind the body. So hyperextension. Okay. So hyperextension. Okay. So next is abduction and adduction. Next is the abduction and adduction. So abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. Okay, next on the other side, abduction and adduction, abduction, adduction. Next is the circumduction, which is you need to move straight arm in a full circle. Like this one. Okay. Circumduction. Circumduction. Next, circumduction. Circumduction. Next is the internal and external rotation, which is bend the elbow at the 90 degrees angle with upper arm parallel to the shoulder. Rotate the shoulder by moving the lower arm upward and downward. So position it in 90-degree position. Okay. Upward. and downward, upward and downward. So upward and downward. Okay. Next, we're going to move in the elbow, the flexion and extension. So flexion and extension. Flexion, extension. Next, on the other part, flexion, extension. Flexion, extension. Next is the pronation and supination, which is you need to flex the elbow and move the hand to palm up and palm down position. So, pronation, supination, pronation, supination. Okay. Is flexion and extension. Flexion. Okay. Extension. Hyperextension. Okay. So again, flexion, extension, hyperextension. Okay. On the other side, flexion, extension, hyperextension. Okay. Next is abduction and adduction. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. Next on the other side, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Next is the ulnar flexion. So ulnar, ulnar, ulnar flexion. Next is radial flexion. Ulnar flexion, radial flexion. Other side. Ulnar flexion, radial flexion, ulnar flexion, radial flexion. In doing the hips and legs range of motion exercise, the flexion and extension, by supporting the lower leg, flex the leg towards the chest and then extend the leg. So, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. So, next on the other side, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, and in extension. So next, the internal and external rotation. Internal and external rotation. Next, on the other side. Next is the abduction, which is moving away the legs from the body, and adduction, putting back the legs. So abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, and then abduction, adduction. On the other side, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, and then abduction, adduction. Okay. The knee, the flexion and extension of the knee by supporting the lower leg, flex and extend the knee. So flexion, extension, and flexion and extension. Last, flexion, extension. Okay, on the other side, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. We are doing this to provide the muscle tone and the joint flexibility. Okay. Next is doing the foot foot flexion and extension, supporting the ankle and the toes upward and then flex the toe downward. So, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. On the other side is flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Next is the adduction and abduction, supporting the ankles, spread the toe apart and then bring them close together. Abduction, adduction, abduction. Kaya mo na lang yun. Kasi abduction kasi like parang gano'n eh.
Okay.
Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Next on the other side, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Next in toe flexion, curve toes downward, and extension, straighten the toes. So, flexion and extension, flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. Next is flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. And lastly, flexion and extension. Next, in doing the abduction and adduction, the abduction by spreading toes apart and adduction by bringing the toes together. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. The other side, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Okay, and lastly, observe the client for any joint and face for signs of exertion, pain, or fatigue during the movement. To also alert the nurse to discontinue exercises. Next is to replace covers and positions in client in proper body alignment to promote comfort of the patient or the client. Okay, and ano mo na lang And lastly, perform hand hygiene by washing hands to prevent the spread of microorganisms. So, thank you, Ma'am Jazz. It is already finished, and thank you for doing